Time now for Back Pages Tonight here on Sky Sports News, bringing you a first look at the sports stories in the morning's newspapers. Joining us are Martin Hardy, the Times and Sunday Times Northern sports correspondent, and Ian Ladyman, the Daily Mail football editor. Now, after all that drama, gentlemen, in Italy between PSG and Spurs, I think the sub-editors must have obviously been watching that, because the papers have come into us a little bit late. So we'll bring you them as we get them in here live on Sky Sports News. But first, Martin, I have to get your reaction to that heartbreaking loss by Spurs, who were 2-0 up going into the 85th minute.
Yeah, it was a strange game to try and summarise. You know, a lot of praise for how well organised Tottenham were. How pragmatic they were, the three defenders. We saw from Thomas Frank's emotion throughout the game that this meant a huge deal to him. He could have been sitting now with a trophy. What a great way to start his time at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. As it is, he has a heartbreaking failure and fails to land that second trophy in 12 weeks. Unfortunate in the sense that the goals came late and, you know, they perhaps took their eye off the ball. We have to remember this is a PSG team that seems to have to play just about every week and have come from the World Club Cup extremely tired. They've only been back in training since last Wednesday, we learned. There's elements of Tottenham's game that we see a kind of a stylistic change, the long throws, the set piece dependency. That was a key feature. It leads to both goals at the end of the first half, the start of the second half. And at that point, they were pressing really hard, pressing very high. It was kind of a little bit, there was a certain elements of what Arsenal did against PSG in the second leg of the semi-final of the European Cup against them. And it worked. But once that rhythm came back into the PSG side, and there are statistics, I think Tottenham will have to change this season. They only passed the ball about 140 times to beat a very, very poor Manchester United team in the final of the Europa League. Today, I think it was about 140, 150 successful passes against 500 and something from PSG. And that meant that once PSG got their rhythm towards the end of the game, Tottenham was struggling for ideas, struggling to get out. Ramos comes on, scores the second goal with a very good header. And from there, it's not, we've realised it's not quite the lottery in a penalty shootout. But it's not a million miles away from being the flip of the coin. So I think there'll be a huge disappointment for Tottenham. I think what we have seen is a complete, the start of a change in style from Postecoglou, which is sometimes, and I did like him in the early days when everything was about going forward, but he became a bit one-dimensional at the finish and wouldn't change his tactics despite the fact he had so many players who weren't available to him tonight. We've seen a little bit of flexibility from Frank tonight. It hasn't quite worked. I think you'll be really, really disappointed about this, despite the fact that fundamentally everything starts at the weekend in terms of the serious stuff for them. But it would have given them a great boost to the start of a managerial campaign, and it was so close.
Yeah, Ian, let's get to your paper, the Daily Mail, calling it a Spurs shocker. Is it a case of new era at Spurs, but same old Spurs?
Well, that's the problem with Spurs, you see, is that it's about perception, and it's about some of the things that people say about them. And I suppose you look at this game, you think, does it really matter? It doesn't really matter that you lose it. It's a glorified friendly, really. PSG have not been back in training for very long, as Martin alluded to there. And it actually would have been quite okay for Tottenham to lose this game. The problem for Tottenham is not that they've lost, but how they've lost. Because if there's one thing, or one of the key things that Thomas Frank has got to change in his however long it is that he spends at Tottenham, it's this idea that Tottenham have a tendency to shoot themselves in the foot, that they snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, or however that phrase goes, turned on its head. And that's exactly what they've done. It's his first competitive game, and that's exactly what has happened. They've played pretty well against the champions of Europe, and they've come very close to beating them, but they haven't. And then they've had the lead in the shootout and looked like they might beat them again, and they haven't. So they've lost it twice in the space of one night, and that is for Thomas Frank the problem. The first opportunity to put a foot forward, actually, what he's done, sadly for him, unfortunately for him and his team, is done a little bit of what many of his predecessors have done. So, look, Thomas Frank isn't going to be losing sleep over this. I wouldn't imagine. As Martin says, the serious stuff starts at the weekend against Burnley. But perceptions are important. Perceptions outside are important. Perceptions within that dressing room are important. The way that players feel are important. They've come off a really, really difficult season last time round. It ended in an incredible night of glory, as we know. But from a league point of view, it was very difficult. All those players, or some of those players, will still have that in their bones. And this is an opportunity for them to start to shake it out, and they fluffed it. So they play Burnley at home, and then guess what? The week after, they're away at Manchester City. So I think they need to hope for something solid, something dependable, something other than what we saw tonight against Burnley. Otherwise, I'm afraid, rightly or wrongly, fairly or unfairly, those questions will be hanging in the air again as they go to the Etihad in about 13 days' time, or wherever it is.
Yeah, well, Martin, Ian said it there, didn't he? Spurs do have a tendency to shoot themselves in the foot. They do have this reputation. And after winning that trophy last season, their first in 17 years, fans might have expected a different Spurs performance tonight where they didn't shoot themselves in the foot. How deep-rooted is this issue? And what does Thomas Frank have to do to get round it?
Well, we do have to remember this is just the start of his time there. And as I said at the start of what I was saying about the match, it was a very pragmatic approach from Thomas Frank, and I think we'll get that a lot more. You are playing against what I consider the best team in the world by a great deal, and once they click and once they bring on some of their substitutes who are top notch, Tottenham were starting to struggle. But let's remember, Thomas Frank has taken over a team here who finished with 38 points last season, at the 5th worst defence in the Premier League, and were 4th bottom of the division. So he's taken over a team that won in Europe in a competition that didn't have a massive amount of great teams in it. It's funny how quickly the narrative could change, because if he'd won tonight and it was very close, then it's a European win, and what a great start for Thomas Frank. As it now happens, because they've lost, you remember all the failings of last season and inside this team, and you realise that there might not be that much change in terms of personnel. Who I did think was a standout tonight was Kudus, who showed real invention, power, determination, had a great first half and showed something different. Tactically, I think it was a lot different to what Postecoglou has done. It got a little bit more of Richarlison by playing the 2 players up front. The three in midfield looked a little bit more compact until that final 25 minutes of the game. You don't get a job like Tottenham if everything was great before you. So he has to change it and he has to implement things. And I don't think Tottenham fans, I'm not sure if they agree with this or not, but that trophy shouldn't gloss over a lot of the failings of this Tottenham team and perhaps this Tottenham club and certain historical elements that Ian has alluded to there. I think on that flight home tonight or tomorrow morning, Thomas Frank will have seen the starts of the team that he wants to build. Whether or not he can get rid of that kind of that it's Tottenham, Roy Keane, Sir Alex Ferguson criticism that was thrown at them, we will see in time. It was very close. I think they will need to play a lot better as the season goes on. They nearly sneaked past, I think the best team in the world at the minute. But there were reasons for PSG's failings in that first half, and a lot of it was fatigue. We'll see how Tottenham develop. It's actually not a bad start for Thomas Frank, I think, despite the fact they've lost.
Yeah, Ian, it's not all bad for these Spurs fans watching this match, are they? There was a good performance from new signing Kudus. Palhinha made his competitive debut, a goal for the new captain Romero. There are plenty of positives to look forward to for the coming season, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's kind of why I say that it kind of does. It doesn't matter, but it also does matter, if you know what I mean. I think Palhinha is a great signing, by the way. I was a huge fan of his when he was at Fulham. I know they're very disappointed when he left. He's a really, really good player, exactly the type of player that Tottenham would need, and he may actually become more important than Kudus. In terms of Kudus, it was interesting. He started well at West Ham when he first went there, faded a little bit. If I'd have been Tottenham, I think I'd have been trying to get Jared Bowen out of West Ham before I tried to do the Kudus deal, but Thomas Frank will probably claim that he knows better than me about those things. Look, I'm always intrigued by Tottenham. They're a brilliant football club. It's never boring watching Tottenham, and I say that as a compliment, by the way. It was never boring under Postecoglou, and I don't expect it to be boring under Thomas Frank either. And those of us who dealt with Thomas do wish him well. He's a terrific guy. He's an absolutely terrific guy. He's a guy who keeps things in perspective, and that'll be very important when you're working at a place like Tottenham. What will be fascinating to see as the season unfolds is how Thomas deals with the spotlight that comes with being manager of Tottenham, because like it or not, it's not the same. Going from Brentford to Tottenham is like jumping into the ocean once, after having a gentle paddle upstream, frankly. And that would be really interesting to see how he deals with that, as much as how he implements his own style onto that squad.
Yeah, you feel at times, Martin, during last season, Postecoglou perhaps found that difficult, or at least didn't enjoy the kind of attention and the media that he had to deal with by being Spurs manager. Do you expect a different approach from Thomas Frank?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said at the start of the Postecoglou reign at Tottenham, I enjoyed the way his teams played, but increasingly in year two, it was prickly. It was the journalist's fault. It was somebody else's fault. And it sat at a direct contrast to the fact that he wanted his teams to play with freedom and expression. And here was him very much buckling under that pressure, snapping at people. And Thomas Frank, as Ian said, that is always good to deal with. He's honest. He gives you a fair perspective of a game afterwards. I'm sure somebody told me years ago that a trainee teacher had been taught the first time you're in a classroom, tell somebody to open or shut a window to establish a little bit of authority inside that room straight away. The fact that he's had to go up Basuma for being late for this game and taking him out of this game is a really clever little trick to say, I might come across as a nice guy here, but I'm in control and you'll do things differently to how it was done before. That's taking a good player out of tonight's game. The interesting part stylistically are that we watch Arsenal, who last season and the season before are relying quite a lot on corners and throw-ins. And now we see a move that was never the case under Postecoglou, who railed against that in defeat against Arsenal. We now see the pragmatic Thomas Frank moving further towards that. So it's going to be a proper potential English game of football when those two giants clash during the season. It's just interesting to see, more compact. And I'm sure Postecoglou's sitting, kicking a chair somewhere going, Vicario's playing, Mickey van der Ven's playing, these players that he was desperate for last season but were never available. But the football club moves on relentlessly. His time is now in the past. This is Thomas Frank's time in charge. And they will play differently. And that was the big standout from tonight's game.
Yeah, like we just saw a copy of the back page of The Sun there, where they've labelled it the Blooper Cup. Spurs blowing a 2-goal lead to lose on penalties. Of course, that will be the headline. That will be the message particularly from opposing fans as well. But Ian, what can Spurs fans look forward to this coming season, do you think? As Martin said, Thomas Frank is likely to be more pragmatic. But can we expect a different Spurs going forward? Although what we saw from Spurs tonight might have been an old Spurs team.
You know what? It's interesting. The Postecoglou thing, by certainly the last 6 months of his time at Tottenham, had become a little bit of an untruth, to be fair. This kind of devil-may-care, expansive attitude to football, the high line, which of course we did see for the first year or so of Postecoglou's time, for good and for bad. He did try to change it. He did try to change it in the last 6 months. And one of his problems was that that didn't work either. Martin alluded to the injuries. He had lots of them. But equally, I saw Tottenham play poorly with all the players available on more than one occasion. Ange, much as we all liked him, had lost his way long before the end of that season. And I think what Tottenham fans will hope for this season is actually quite an un-Tottenham type thing. What they will hope for is a little bit of dependability, because as much as they're a club that prides itself on, to dare is to do and all the rest of it, and it's all about the glory, and it is, but you know what? It's about winning. And Tottenham at times have embarrassed themselves. It's hard to say that about a team that's won the Europa League, right? But they did. They were embarrassing at times in the latter stages of Postecoglou's time. They did embarrassing things in their own penalty area. They lost by embarrassing margins in embarrassing ways. And that's hard for any fan base to take. And so I think moving forward, what Tottenham fans, again, as strange as it sounds, will look for this season is a little less of that, a little bit of credibility, a little bit of reliability, a bit of consistency, a little bit of knowing what the team are likely to do when they turn up on a Saturday or a Sunday, because they didn't have that under Postecoglou. They will have that under Thomas Frank. They will see quite soon how he will play. It will be slightly more functional for sure, but if it means that they don't ship 2 or 3 goals every time they step out at home, then that'll be a start.
Yeah, All eyes then on their opener against Burnley in the Premier League on Saturday. Ian, Martin, thank you for the moment. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll look at more of the sports stories in the morning's newspapers, including this in the Times. United are in no man's land, says Rashford. Stay with us.
Heroes like Martin get a little bit more with Lidl Plus.
You're watching Back Pages tonight. Welcome back to Martin Hardy, the Times and Sunday Times Northern sports correspondent, and to Ian Ladyman as well, the Daily Mail football editor. Let's take a look then at the back page of the Times. And there's been some stinging criticism from Manchester United forward Marcus Rashford. He describes them as being in no man's land. Martin, what's your reaction to what he's been saying?
This might be quite interesting because I think Ian will probably go a bit more into Rashford and his performances at Manchester United over that period. In essence, I agree with quite a lot of what he said, and we've just discussed Tottenham, who went from the open play of Postecoglou to the pragmatic Thomas Frank, and the transition of managers or head coaches inside football clubs doesn't necessarily follow a path of we want to play this way. And I think inside of Marcus Rashford's comments about that malaise inside the club that he's been at since he was a young boy is the fact that it just jumped from style to style to style, and the players weren't necessarily sure what the grand plan was. And what we realise now is there wasn't one. That's why the club has drifted so far away, and why it's had to have yet another big summer in terms of spending on established players rather than being a bit smart in the transfer market and bringing players through. It was interesting. He spoke about that. There is that kind of Barcelona style of football that we all know and generally quite like. The Lamine Yamal has carried that through. Lewandowski, Rafinha. These are players that he's going to have to compete with and try and get past. But in the comments to Paul Hurst's piece there in the Times from the interview with Gary Lineker, somebody has said, yeah, Manchester United have had 7 managers in 12 years since Sir Alex Ferguson left, and Barcelona have had 9. And the reply to that, though, is there is still a belief, I think, when you're watching a game of football, that Barcelona will try and play a certain way, which has been carried by the present manager. At Manchester United, I don't think, and Ian watches more of them than I do, that anybody has known from season to season what the grand plan was, how they were trying to play, whether they were trying to play possession football, whether they were trying to win things under Mourinho, whether it was about controlling a game like Van Gaal, whether it was quick pace on the counter attack under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. It was always changing. I think Ian may disagree here, but I'm disappointed Marcus Rashford has left Manchester United because I still think there was a good player in there. He's got a hell of a move, and I'm not surprised that he says, I would love to stay at Barcelona and make it permanent, because who wouldn't, to be quite honest, especially as things have run away from him at his former club. It'll be interesting to see how he does. I hope he does well. I've always said when I come on here, I would like to have seen him tried as an out-and-out centre forward at Manchester United, especially when they've struggled so much in that position over the years. But he was said not to be that keen, and certain managers haven't trusted him, and he's taken his pace and hopefully a bit of drive that he showed in that loan spell at Aston Villa to Spain, and we'll see how he does in La Liga this season.
Yeah, these quotes from Marcus Rashford also coming from the Rest is Football podcast also feature on the back of the Mail as well, where they say United are in no man's land, blasts Rashford. Ian, also quoted by Marcus Rashford, he says, if your direction is always changing, you can't expect to be able to win the league. What do you think of what he said?
I agree with Martin to a degree, certainly on one very basic point, which is that Marcus Rashford is right. Of course he's right. If you keep changing your manager, you don't tend to win things. You change your manager because things are wrong, okay? So you don't tend to win things. But we know that, okay? We know that. I could say that. Martin could say that. Anybody could say that. What I asked myself was, why is Marcus Rashford saying this? And why is he saying it now, okay? Look at Marcus. He's just come off a pretty dismal couple of seasons, okay? Erik ten Hag didn't have any time for him. Ruben Amorim's had no time for him. 2 managers there who decided that Marcus wasn't for them, not just in terms of what he could or couldn't do on the football field, in terms of what he brought to the general atmosphere at that football club. So make of that what you want. He's now found himself, and I think quite fortunately, in this fantastic football club, Barcelona. What a move. I was on this programme 3 or 4 weeks ago talking about it. I think he's lucky to get that move, okay? I think he's got it on reputation rather than what he's done in the last couple of years, but he's got it, and fair play to him. What an opportunity. So why on earth, what motivates him to sit there now? And, great get by Gary Lineker, by the way, fair play. Everybody would have loved to have had that interview. Of course he would. But what motivates Marcus to sit there now and say these things that he knows puts Manchester United, the club that still holds his registration, by the way, still their player, puts Manchester United firmly on the back of the back page, on the back of the newspapers, on the top of all the websites, once again, and not for a good reason. 3 days before the Premier League season starts. Why would you do that? And I've said, whose purpose does it serve? It doesn't serve United's purpose, doesn't serve Barcelona's purpose, because he's their player now. Why is he talking about the club that he's just left? Does it serve his own purpose? Maybe he thinks it does. I think it doesn't. I've said before, I don't think there's anything malevolent about Marcus Rashford. I think Marcus Rashford is a good guy deep down. I think he's lost his way a little bit. But what is a theme of the Marcus Rashford story in the last couple of years, from where I'm sitting, is a constant inability to accept or recognise that he may, in some way, have played a part in his own downfall or in his own loss of direction. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember him ever sitting down and saying, you know what, I think I might have done better there. I think I should have done better there. I think maybe this was a mistake that I made. I think maybe I shouldn't have done that. I think I should have done this. It's never that. The theme of things that Marcus tends to say these days are always how other people, and largely people at Manchester United, have got, or people in the media, have got things wrong. And I'm sorry, Marcus, but you've got things wrong in the last 2 years. Bruno Fernandes has managed to shine and thrive at this crazy directionless football club that is Manchester United. And when you're struggling at a football club, what do you need? When you haven't got direction, when you are in no man's land, as Marcus Rashford says, what do you need? You need your best players to stand up and play. Well, where was Marcus Rashford when they needed him? He was nowhere. Now he's at Barcelona. good luck to him. I echo what Martin says. I hope he does well. Thomas Tuchel, England manager, really hopes he does well because he wants him at the World Cup next summer. And I think we all do. So we wish him well. But I'll tell you what, Marcus, let's get your head down and play.
Yeah, well, Marcus Rashford's comments certainly dividing opinion. Now, I want to turn our attentions to the back of the Sun, where Jack Rosser has spoken about Mark Gahey and the fact that he will be staying at Palace despite interest from Liverpool. Martin, what's your take on this? Is this the best thing for Mark Gahey to stay at Crystal Palace rather than go to a bigger, so-called bigger club?
No disrespect to Jack, but until that transfer window shuts, anything remains possible. So we'll see. A lot of interest in is he 24 years old now? Could be England's centre-half. The one thing for Mark is that ahead of his international career, he will want to be playing every week this week. And is he guaranteed that if he goes to Liverpool, we would have to see? Maybe he's not. Is the fee something that could be sorted between Liverpool and Crystal Palace as we get towards that window closing, and suddenly Crystal Palace decide to take a hit to bring it down to maybe 30? I know it's gone down from 65, 70 last summer to 50 at the start of this summer, down to 40. So it does seem to be dropping at quite a rate. At the same time, the Crystal Palace manager has come out and said that he wants more players in his squad.
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Sorry to interrupt you. We've run out of time. It's sped along quickly. Ian, Martin, thank you for your thoughts. Much more reaction to come to Spurs after they lose the Super Cup final. Next.